Hello, everyone, and welcome to this live stream on how to use, well, we're going to make speckled eggs, and what that covers is how to use colored cocoa butter effectively and hopefully help you troubleshoot. Like I said a minute ago, you can ask questions as we go along. I can't see them from where I'm standing at the moment, but I can see them pop up. So every couple of minutes, I'll just come over to the screen and I'll answer your questions. So just feel free to ask what you need to ask. So for getting going, let's just talk briefly about tools, go over that first. So I'm using a 100 millimeter egg mold here. I did a free live stream a few years ago on a golden egg, and we did little eggs. They were maybe 40 millimeters. So today I thought we would do a larger mold because there's differences between using a small one and a large one. So if you want to also see that live stream, I'll just put the link here in the chat box. And that takes you to all my free live stream content. And you can just download what you want, so you'll see it on there. So that's using a small mold, which is different than using a larger mold. So this is a Chocolate World, I think it's 1254 egg mold, 100 millimeters, 4 cavities, so 2 full eggs per mold. So that's the mold that we're using today. I've got scrapers. I always use 2 because I typically, when I'm shelling, I'll shell, several molds at a time. This will get chocolate caked up on it. So you use the other one to scrape the chocolate off of this one. It's good to have 2 of those around. And then mini spatulas and small stainless steel bowls for tempering the color. Not going to use a lot, even if you did have 4 molds. These are maybe 250 mils, 300 mil capacity is plenty for tempering your colors. Small silicone spatulas are really flexible and great for getting the color all around the, off the bowl and stuff like that. Tools that we're going to be using for this design, just your standard issue toothbrush, unused by a human mouth, preferably, and then a round brush. Now, this is quite a large one because we have a large cavity here. When these round brushes, when you first get them, they look like this. So they're pointed. The more that you use them, what I think is a better, it's a better brush for painting. So that's the brush that we're going to be using today. You can use whatever you want, though. You don't have to use these specific tools. You could also splatter by just, with your finger. That gives you a longer splat, etc. So paper towels, also very useful to use during coloring. Now, the colors themselves, if you're follow me on Instagram, I posted a reel the other day on how to melt your colors down. So I'm not going to go too in depth in class today about that. So we're using Roxy and Rich Blue. I use their natural line, blue, white, and I'm using their gold, which I think, no, actually I'm using a gold from Chef Rubber for the splats. So those are the ones we're using. Once they're melted down, we're going to just pour it in here. We're going to temper it. I have 2 reels. One is how to melt them down, either using a dehydrator or using your oven on a low temperature. And then how to temper them as well. But we're going to obviously go through that in class today. So these are all melted down and ready to go. Now, let's just talk briefly about your conditions in your room. So I have a room thermometer here. So it's 18 degrees, 48% humidity. These are decent working conditions. This is probably reading a little bit higher because it's on the shelf above my dehydrator, which is on, so it's warming it a little bit more. The room temperature is probably closer to about 17 or 16, which is my preference for working with chocolate. It's great to have one of those around and to just get used to taking those temperature, like knowing your conditions, because as they change, things might change with the way, well, they will most certainly change with the way that you work. So 18 degrees, let's have a look at the temperature of the mold, which is likely to be very similar to the room temperature. Let's have a look. Mold is 17.6. So like I said, it's probably not as warm as that's saying. And that's not too bad. I like that for coloring. 17.6 is good. Typically, I might work more around 16 degrees, which I really like. The colder the mold, the quicker the colors are going to set against it. Not crystallize necessarily, but set against it. So if your mold was 22 degrees and your room temperature was 22 degrees and you put your color on and your color's mold. So if you've ever had that issue, it's because your color's too warm, your mold's probably too warm. Now, for chilling your mold, you can put it on its side like this in the refrigerator, just a standard refrigerator, for about 30 seconds up to a minute. We don't want to go for too long in the refrigerator. And if your room temperature is warm and humid, this is something you'll want to avoid and you'll need to get an air conditioner. Because if your room temperature is high and it's a little bit humid, and then you take it out of the refrigerator and it's 16 degrees, you're going to get immediately condensation that forms on the mold, and it's going to ruin everything. So really, the conditions that you need are no higher than about 20 degrees room temperature. Some people work up to 22 degrees, and then the relative humidity no higher than 60%. You can there's leeway within that. But if you start working outside of those parameters, you're going to just run into problems. So the best thing is really to create an environment that supports what you're doing. So I think that's that for now. So we're going to get started with the goals. So we're just going to take a little bit of this is chef rubber gold here, and I'm going to pour just a little bit of this. We don't need a lot, just for a little splat. I've been asked in the past, do I use silk when I temper my colors? No, I don't. Every now and again, I'll use silk to temper my colors. And all we did was we melted these down to about 50 degrees. And then we get them into the bowl, really small amount, tempers really fast. So the temperature there was already down to 29. So we're just going to bring this down to about 28. And then using your heat gun, this one has a variable control. It goes up to 600 degrees and down to 50. We just run it on a low temperature. If it's too high, you're going to take the color directly out of temper and just bring that up to about 30 degrees, which is going to be our working temperature. Okay, that's 30 degrees. We'll move the camera in a little bit here. Okay, so we're going to use toothbrush first. Now, whenever I come to use my tools and they've been just sat and for a little while, I like to warm them just gently to get any excess cocoa butter off of them over the heat gun. Always do that on the lowest temperature, or you're going to end up singeing your bristles, whether that's on a brush or otherwise. And that just gets any excess cocoa butter out. And then we take it to the mold. You can do this in a lot of different ways. Everybody does this a little bit differently. The way that I found the easiest for me is I grab a little bit. You don't want tons on there. You're going to get big splats on it. Just grab a little bit, use the edge of the bowl. And as the color gets cooler, naturally, as it just gets, which I quite like, but if you want a fine mist, then you want to make sure the color remains around 30 degrees as you're working. Yeah, you can use a hairdryer. Just make sure that the hairdryer is I'm assuming that because it's going to be on somebody's head, it would be a low temperature anyway, but just make sure it's not too high or it's going to take your colors out of temper. And we're done with the gold now, so I'm just draining the brush out. And then notice how I put the mold on its side. When the crystals, when the cocoa butter is still crystallizing, especially when you have, a chocolate shell in here, it creates warmth as it crystallizes. So if you put the mold down like this, even if you put it like that, you're blocking heat, you're blocking air circulation into the mold, so it takes longer for it to actually set. And before we do anything else on this mold, we want to make sure that that's nice and set. So despite the fact that it's about 17 degrees, I'm going to put it in the fridge for about 30 seconds on its side, just to make sure that color is definitely set before we move on to putting on our background color. And now I'm not going to use the gold again, so I can turn my heat right up and just get the excess color out of the bowl. And you can do this with any colors. You don't even need to use gold. You could do, a blue against a light blue background, or you could do purple against, a light blue background, or yellow against, and then you can change your splatter colors. You can change your background colors. This is just to illustrate the technique used and some little things along the way that will help. So color back in. And then I temper these every time I'm going to use them. They stay at room temperature. And then I always clean my bowls with paper towel before they go to the sink, because otherwise you're going to get an accumulation of cocoa butter in your drains, and then that's going to get blocked up at some point. and clean your brush. You'll always need to clean your brush again when you start next time, because the cocoa butter really does kind of get in there and kind of burrow. So always give it a clean before you start again. Okay, so let's get to making our light blue, which is just simply a mix of blue and white. I have a little bit here from the one I prepped for yesterday. So I'm gonna take our blue. You're gonna create whatever shade you want here. So that's about 36. We're going to use silk for the background just to illustrate that, which is going to be the same way that we're going to temper our chocolate for shelling, is in beta crystal form. And you just simply add that to your chocolate. It's about 1%, 0.5 to 1% that you add. So right now it's just a little dash. I'm not measuring it. I know that that's going to do it. And then you can be really confident in knowing that that is indeed tempered, and it's going to be really nice as well. Let's check the temperature. So that's at 31, and that's good to go. We can start using it straight away. So we're just waiting on our color from the fridge. So let me grab out that mold. And let's take the temperature of the mold. So that's 11. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do this, and the room temperature will bring that temperature up of the mold. Or you can just let it come up. If you start using it at such a cold temperature, your brush will firm up really quickly because the color will set really fast. Okay, so that's now at about 15. I'm okay with that. So we'll take another temperature on the, that's 28, that's fine. So all we're going to do now is we're putting on what I refer to as the background canvas kind of thing. So when you're painting on a canvas, you start on the canvas and you add paint to it. When it comes to a mold, it's backwards. So you're putting on the design first and the canvas last. In this case, if we're using dark chocolate to shell, which we are, if we just did blue on here, it's not like the blue without the white. It's not going to show up very well against dark chocolate. So we want either a light color, or you could do blue and then you back it up with white. And it's just as simple as to paint it into the cavity. When you do splatters on a large cavity like this, you might find some air pockets, which you'll really only know what I'm talking about when you actually do it, where the color just doesn't go completely around the splatter. So you might need to just kind of dab into it a bit, add a little bit of pressure to get the color to go right down to the surface. And we're not trying to put in loads of color here. That's not the point. It's just to get a thin coating. And then we'll come back and we'll do one more coating. And keep your butter in temper with your heat gun. Now, because the mold was so cool, I can go right back on and add my next coating on. But if your mold is like 17 degrees, it wouldn't be set enough by this point for you to go back directly on and put the next coating. You'll end up taking paint off. So in that case, just let it sit for a few minutes, maybe pop it in the fridge for a couple minutes. Okay, so that's our background color. Scrape off the excess. And then there's our finished design. So I'm going to pop it on its side here, and then we're finished with the color. So while your brush, or your gun is on low heat, just start getting the paint out of the brush, which there's going to be quite a lot in there. Soften it all up. And then you can kind of just get it out onto the side of the bowl. There's going to be a good kind of tablespoon. This is such a large brush. And then once you've gotten most of it out, you can finish it up with a paper towel. And again, you'll just clean this again with warm air. So when you start to work again. And then our color in the bowl again, heat gun on high. We're just going to remove that. And then with this, because you just made a new color, just find a little container or a bowl in your house or your kitchen, wherever you're working, that you can store this color. And I usually use these these little finger bowl kind of things. And then next time you need light blue, you just use it up. Okay, so we're going to start tempering our dark chocolate to make the shell. Now I've had dark chocolate melting on the stove. It already came up to 50 degrees. And so I turned it off a couple minutes ago. So we just want the same as what we just did with the color. We just want that to come to 36 degrees. We can add our soak in. We'll bring it down to about 32, and then we're going to shell the mold. When you have color on a mold, you want to make sure that you shell when it's about 32 degrees, 31.5 to 32 degrees. If you don't, the color can end up sticking onto the mold and not actually adhering to the chocolate shell. Someone had written before class about that particular question. There are other factors that can make the chocolate stick, the color stick. One is what we just said about the temperature of the chocolate being about 31 to 32 degrees. So it softens the color and it comes off. The other is if you've not tempered it properly. If the color hasn't been tempered properly, that can also happen. Okay, so that's just going to need to come down in temperature. Are there any questions at the moment while this is coming down in temperature? Anything that you'd like to ask? Any help that you'd like with any of your chocolate work across the board? Feel free to ask. Joseph says so. All right. Are you leading into something or? Amy, do you just use heat to clean the brushes? Yes, I used to wash them with soap, and it really just doesn't do as good of a job as heat does. Can you just repeat your tempering temps for chocolate and colored again? Yeah, sure. So the tempering temperature, Aaron, are you using silk or are you tempering by temperature alone? Temperature and motion. I'll repeat both just in case you've walked away from the computer or something for a minute. So when you're using silk, some people just melt the chocolate up to 36 degrees. Since switched to homemade silk life, yeah, I hear you, I understand. That's okay. So when you're using silk, people will do it one of two ways. The way that I do it is not the way everybody does it. So I heat my chocolate up to about 48 to 50 degrees. And then I let it come down naturally to 36 if I'm just working in the kitchen, as this is a class. I'm not just going to sit here waiting for it to cool. So I'm just mixing it only in order to cool it. When it comes to 36, which is at now, I'm going to add in my silk. If you try and add this at a lower temperature, if it's the set silk, you're going to end up with it little flecks in your chocolate. So if you add it at 34 degrees, it's not going to melt, which is an experience I had a lot with my cryo. So at 36 degrees, it melts through. And you only need about 1%. Some people say 0.5%, but I've had mixed results with that. I tend to go with 1%. And then I use it at 32 to shell, or to shell, when you're shelling color. if you're shelling a mold and there's no color on it, do what you want. You can shell it at 29 degrees, 30 degrees, whatever, because the lower the temperature of the chocolate when you shell, in that situation, the quicker the shell is going to actually form because the chocolate's cooler. So now I'm just mixing it just to get the silk mixed through. But you can start using it from 33 degrees, and that's at 34.2. So we're just going to hold fire for a second. As a newbie, what's silk, please? So silk is actually, I'll just put it here one more time so it's easy to find it. So I have a selection of free live streams. That's the direct link to my live stream on how to make silk, what it is, how to use it, how to make it. But just to briefly explain, so silk is cocoa butter that, in this case, you can buy machines to do this, but I bought a sous vide instead. I didn't want to spend 1,200 pounds on a machine to make silk. So you take cocoa butter, you put it into jars, you put it in a sous vide, you hold the temperature, I think it's 33.4 for 24 hours, at which point, or during that process rather, the crystals of the butter turn to beta crystals, which is what we're doing when we temper chocolate, is we want a degree of beta crystals in there. So instead of having to do the whole tempering process and entice those crystals ourselves, we make silk, we add it in, then we have our beta crystals, and it's a much easier method of tempering. So hopefully that answered that for you. If anybody else would like to expand on that, feel free. So this is now at 32 degrees. So we're taking our mold, and I'm going to fill the cavities right to the top. Especially if you have color, you want to make sure you're filling them directly to the top. And I apologize because I know this isn't a very good view, but I'm literally just pouring chocolate in the mold. And now it's a little bit like watching water boil because you don't just tap this out. Like if this was a bonbon shell, it maybe would be 10, 15 seconds, and then we would tap the chocolate out. But because what we need is a good thick shell to form, and you can decide what kind of thickness you want the shell to be. It's going to be dependent on what you're going to use the egg for. Are you filling the egg? Is there a layer of something going inside, or are you completely filling it up with something? Is it going to be hollow? Like all these questions are things that are going to dictate how thick or how thin you want the shell to be. So in this case, we're going to go for like maybe, I think it's like about 5 millimeters maybe. Just going to scrape the top off just so that we can really see how it's forming. The other thing is, one sec while I do that, a pour, and then you get a big streak of chocolate going across. Let's say it's pretty blobby, like it's a big old pour streak across the top. Because this is going to sit for so long, the chocolate that gets onto the surface of the mold, it starts to set, and it can set pretty firmly by the time you're ready to actually tap the mold out. And if you leave it on there, it can actually break into your shell. So I always like to scrape the top off and make sure it's nice and clean. If you don't feel comfortable scraping it into a bowl and holding it up, then just do that onto your table. But you really want to get that off because it's going to make the next step a lot easier. So at this stage, we're just going to pop it on the table, and we're just going to shake it every now and again. This is going to take a good few minutes. So, settle in, get a cup of tea. And then we're just going to shake it every couple of minutes and look for the edge that's forming. So when it gets to the point that we want, these are ones I did prior to class, this is the edge that you're going to see, this thick edge that forms. And you'll see liquid chocolate in the center and this edge around the edge, because that's where edges are. So that's what we're kind of going to like wait for now. Only sharing with you, but have a microwave recipe for silk that I got from my color course. I didn't want to buy a sous vide. It works really well. Okie dokie. Thank you. How do you determine the thickness? Is there any tips for this? As you just mentioned, 5 millimeter for this example. It really takes practice. I guess in terms of determining the thickness that you're going to use. These ones would be a fairly good thickness all the way around. So these are the ones I did in preparation for class. Well, these could be hollow. These could be fused together and sold hollow because they're a decent thickness. They could even be maybe just a smidge thicker than this. They could also be good for layering something inside of it. Like I'm doing an egg next week with a praline layer inside and then another chocolate layer on top of that. And this would be good for that as well. If you had it thinner than this, you'd really want something else that's going to be in there that's going to firm it up. So like, let's say a praline layer, because that's going to set firm. And then that's going to give stability to the shell. Otherwise, you do risk it breaking quite easily if you're going with a thinner shell. I hope that makes sense. Do you ever double coat? The only time, so I'm quite confident with this size mold. What I'm not confident with is a much bigger mold. Let me just show you how this is setting, and then we'll come back to that. Just one sec. So can you see the edge that's starting to form there? Very, very thin. It's maybe 3 millimeters at this point. So we want that to be a bit thicker. So I started working with 150 millimeter eggs, which are actually a lot bigger than I thought they were going to be. The molds are pretty different. It takes a kilo to fill when you're doing the shelling. So these were a lot more tricky to work with. They're very big. So for these, I had a lot of difficulty at first with the shelling and understanding how to get the right thickness. So what I did was in the end, I weighed this on my scale blank and then tared the weight off and then filled it and did all my shelling and all that. And then when I inverted the mold and looked at the shell, I didn't know, because I didn't know how, I just couldn't tell yet how thick they were going to be. Put it on the scale and see. So if it was 100 grams that was in there of chocolate, that would mean there were only 50 grams per mold, and that wouldn't be enough. So at that point, immediately pour chocolate back in, because what you don't want is for the chocolate to set and then you pour more chocolate in, because then you're going to end up with 2 chocolate layers and they could flake apart. So you want to do it immediately. The other kind of hack that you could do is, if you don't do it soon enough and it does start to kind of go matte, is you can heat it with a heat gun and try that. I'd not done that before, but it could potentially work. Okay, so now you see that has a really nice thickness. Just when we turn it to the side, you can start to see that edge forming. So I'm happy with that. Over our bowl, tilt it, and just start tapping to remove the excess. While it's inverted, just under the mold here, and I'm just going to scrape away that excess. And I like to keep it inverted. Turn it back over too soon, and then you get a lot of thickness down here. So I just like to keep it inverted just to not have to deal with that in my life. And then at this stage, not a whole lot of chocolate on the surface, but we want to take away any excess chocolate now. And that's the point right there. That's right that I was talking about, where and it would crack into the shell. That's happened on a few occasions to me, and you learn quickly when that happens to not do that anymore. So now at this stage, I'm going to put it on its side, either room temperature, as long as your room temperature isn't over the, sort of 20 degrees that we were talking about earlier. Or if you're in a hurry, you can put them in the fridge for 10 minutes, then take them out. It just kickstarts the setting process. Then take them out and you leave them at room temperature until they completely release. Now, what's the difference between when they released and when they haven't? So at this point, just take a look at the bottom of the mold here. This doesn't look transparent or clear at all, because that's just fresh. Let me pop that in the fridge, and we might be able to look at that before we finish today. Probably not. But then if we look at these, good thing I'm not using these for anything. If we look at these, you can see that there's like a clearness in the bottom of the mold. So if you take it out of the fridge and there's dark spots, it's because it's not ready to come out yet. Don't twist it to get it out. Because the thing with Easter eggs is that you'll get a kind of stuckness here. And if you go to pull it out, it'll break on the edge of the shell there. So if we do have a look at these ones that have broken, we'll look at the design in a moment, but if we have a look at these ones. So if you look at the thickness of the edge, so that's the thickness of the edge. Now the thickness here is going to be quite different. So if you have a look now at the thickness of that, it's not that thick. The edge forms faster because it's exposed to the air on the top of the mold. So it's not super, super thick when you look at it like that. Now for these, I would be doing a praline inside, so I wouldn't really care. But if I'd want that to be a little bit thicker. Okay, so let's have a look at the design. a really lovely design. People react very well to this on the stall. I do a market stall, and they love the splatter design. They always say it looked like duck eggs. Now from here, we want to look at how do we fuse them together. Now there's different options. Everybody does this a little bit differently. But like we were talking about, if you're going to double layer an egg, it's kind of similar to the fusing. I found a little hack recently for this. So you can do it a couple different ways. One is get some gloves on. One sec, I'm just going to get this. So you can do one half, and then we're going to do something else with the other half. It can be really finicky. No, I'm lying. It's very finicky, this part of the process. Especially if you've colored the egg. It gets even more kind of finicky because you don't want to handle it too much or you're going to get finger marks on it. So if we leave one of them in the mold, flush to the mold like that. And then if you've ever tapped bonbons before, we're going to do something that's quite similar to that. So we're going to heat the top just so that it glistens. And then we're going to take this one and we're going to heat it just to the point where you see a little bit of butter melting. And then you're just going to pop that on top. Now let's talk about pros and cons of doing this. So if this is too hot and you leave the egg on there too long, the egg just starts to melt, that edge starts melting away and the edge just starts melting away from the egg and then it's misshapen. So you do have to be pretty like quick about it and you don't need too much melting. The whole point here is we need both halves to have a little bit of meltiness to them. Because if you put one end on, or one side on rather, that's melted onto something that isn't, it's like when you cap. The reason that you heat the top of the mold when you cap is because that layer of chocolate you're putting on, if you just put it on a chocolate set, it's not going to adhere very well. The two meld together. It's the same principle with the egg. Now, the other option is you take both halves, you heat them, and then you put them together like that. The only downside of doing that is you're handling them quite a lot in that case. And if you were filling them with something, it gets even more like fiddly, that you have to handle it even more. And you risk all kinds of stuff. If you melt them too much, when you put them together, you get this blob of chocolate around the edge. So you can just experiment with different ways of doing it and find what works for you. But this one has been quite successful for me as of late. I'm just going to pop this in the fridge to fully set so that we can pop that out. When you have your mold in the fridge for the setting of the shells, like this one that we just did, you're gonna have it on its side like that. Sometimes it's gonna set really fast and the egg can just kind of slide out. So when you take it out of the fridge, do that and then pull it out. Don't pull it out on its side where you could end up what I just did earlier, cracking them all. So if we have a look at the bottom of this one, you'll see some spots. I don't know if it's going to come across in the video really, where it's still sticking where it's darker, like here. Oops, wrong one. Nope. There, that big spot right there, where it still just hasn't released yet. And then you'll see lighter areas where it has started to release. But that can just go on its side on a table now, and that'll just continue releasing on its own. Yeah, good. I'm glad that you like that technique. It was something I discovered actually when I was doing truffles. So I had 2 half spheres and both of them were filled with ganache. And I was like, this is such a nightmare. I know some people just smack the mold together, but that really freaks me out. So, so I started doing it with that and it worked really well. So we just have a couple minutes left, just waiting for that egg to set and then we'll take it out. I'll show you what it looks like. So any questions, feel free to ask. Otherwise, I'm just going to start tidying up a little bit while that's setting. Judy, do you want to share the microwave method that you were talking about? For anybody who doesn't want to buy a sous vide? Um, Putting them together was my biggest issue, so looking forward, it's easier. I stepped away when you start placing the flex together because you just recap verbally how you did it. Um, I was thinking you could just briefly tell us in here so that people in here can see it or to understand what you were talking about. I actually don't own a microwave. Or maybe if you could post it in the chocolate group, that might be helpful. Um, Aaron, so, well, two things. One is I can verbally recap it, but also you're going to get a recording of the class, so you can go back and have a little look. It's a little bit hard to verbally recap, but you melt one half of the egg against a pan, and the other egg you leave in the mold, and you apply a little bit of heat to the surface just so it's glistening. And then you take Amy, where do you switch your molds? This is Joseph. This is Boston Joseph. Is that correct? Just ascertaining where you live. You're in the States. Um, I think in the States, the best place is Chef Rubber. Where else? Judy, do you know of places in the States for molds? I think if you just do an online search for polycarbonate or professional chocolate molds on the old Google, it should bring up lots of websites in the States where you can get molds. I would look up specifically Chocolate World professional molds in the US because those are particularly good. But yeah, Chef Rubber is out of Vegas and they sell great molds. Thank you very much, Maria, for adding that in. And is there anywhere to get larger bottles of cocoa butter, colored cocoa butter? You're spelling that with a U, so you're from presumably England. Um, where are you currently getting them from? I guess that doesn't really matter. You know Keylink, Aaron? Okay. Yeah, Amazon is a no-go. Don't get them from Amazon. Go to Keylink, Keylink. I think it's .com. They do like a massive range of Roxy and Rich. I don't know if you want just the standard colors or if you want the natural colors, but if you want their natural line, you can write to them and they will get them in for you. They're fantastic, Keylink. Where can you buy silk in the USA? You can buy it from, where can you buy silk from the USA? There is a website, it's not coming to mind at the moment. I would just do a search online and see if anybody sells it. There's another product called My Cryo that's made by Calabo that is silk, but I used that for years and it's just not very good. In the end, it wasn't very good. It was quite, what's the word? Inconsistent. So, you might come across that in your search. I'd say just avoid that. You mentioned the chocolate group. Am I able to join? Sure. I will send a link to join the chocolate group recording. I've used Keylink and say they're fab. Yeah, yeah, that's the one. Chocolate Academy. That's the one. Okay, let's have a look and see if this egg. So in terms of the edge, we retained a really nice edge using this technique. Very little blobby chocolates on the outside. So lovely, lovely design, very simple, minutes to do. Very little disruption around the edge there. I'm very happy with that. But honestly, it's cheaper to make yourself. Yeah, Aaron's right. By the time you buy it like 5 times, you could have just gotten yourself a sous vide and made it yourself, like endlessly for the rest of your life. So he is right about that. But I have to say also that it took me ages to actually bike away. But it is one of those things that once you do it, you'll wish you did it ages ago. Full disclosure. Right, my friends, that is it for today's class. Any questions before we finish, feel free to shout. Full disclosure, I've had some issues with Zoom videos recently. The recordings have become corrupted. So I'm hoping that the recording is fine and I'll send it out after class. But if not, it will be refilmed and sent to you at a later date. So hopefully it's okay, but if not, just so you know. And like I said, I'll send you a link to join my Facebook group so that you can ask questions in there, whatever might come up for you. Aaron, you're very welcome, and I am super happy to hear that. And I hope it improves your chocolate work. Great, thank you, Joseph. I'm glad you enjoyed it. And Judy, thank you for sending that over. You're very welcome. Have a wonderful day, guys, and a great Easter. And I shall see you again soon. You're very welcome. Bye-bye, everybody.